What's up guys, Racing Nation TV here, back with another video, and today we're going to be grading each 2022 IndyCar driver's season. We're going to be going through all 25 full-time cars, so that's excluding the one-off 500 entries and so forth, because that feels only fair to grade the guys who competed for all 17 races. So let's get into it. Before I get into it, make sure you go down below, hit the subscribe button. It helps me out a ton. So let's get straight into it. So first up, we have Dalton Kellett, 25th in the standings. He had a best finish of 17th this season. The only real highlight I remember out of Dalton was that he made Q2 or round 2, the round of 12 in qualifying at Nashville, but he unfortunately DNF'd that race. Now I'm a little bit, it's pretty sad honestly, because last season I could have said, you know, he had that great run at Gateway. Really that was a highlight last year, but this season, I love Dalton. There's not a lot to look at from this season, unfortunately. I hope he continues racing in IndyCar. I hope he continues to improve. But he gets a D for this year. Let's just move on. Kyle Kirkwood. He had a best finish of 10th this season. 24th in the standings, however. That's pretty unfortunate. He was running well. I remember at Texas, and that was race number 2 of the year. His first ever oval. Unfortunately, that he ended up hitting the wall and DNF from Texas. He only completed 79% of the laps this season, and only had 5 lead lap finishes total and 7 DNFs overall. Kyle Kirkwood gets a D this season. He's moving on to Andretti Autosport next season, but unfortunately for Kirkwood, this was one of the things this season that was really interesting to me was, you know, Kirkwood really just was disappointing on a lot of levels. Even for being in a Foyt car, I think it was overall disappointing. And there's not a lot of confidence there, even with him in an Andretti car for next season. For me, I'm still on the Kyle Kirkwood train, but I think it's just, I don't know, he had a tough year. It was pretty abysmal, to say the least. It was bad. And if he continues, the biggest thing next season is going to be finishing races. Because if he continues to just have these unnecessary DNFs, even in an Andretti car, you know, Michael's not going to put up for it for long. And it's going to be a pretty quick in and out for Kirkwood, unfortunately. But I hope next season he can start finishing some races, maybe, you know, work his way into the top 15, top 10s, and then maybe we can see the Kyle Kirkwood that we all know he can be. We know that Kirkwood, from his absolute dominance in the road to Indy, that he is one hell of a driver. Moving on to Devlin DeFrancesco in 23rd. Now, he had a tough start to the season. I remember going into April, you know, the Texas thing, that was a big deal. Remember that. This late in the year, do you still remember that? Crashed at Long Beach. But then he finished 20th at the 500. And since then, there's only one race in the last 12 races that he finished outside the top 20. And I think he completed 90% of the laps, only had 3 DNFs. There was Texas, Long Beach, and then there was one at the end of the season. And without that one at the DNF at the end of the season, you know, from Indy to Laguna, all inside the top 20. Finished, I believe, all the laps. 12th at Gateway at the end of the year. Actually was running in the top 10 for a long time. I really thought he was going to have a good, you know, 8th place day that night. But unfortunately, he didn't get to finish inside the top 10 that night. So when the expectation was already low, and then he finishes most of the races inside the top 20, I got to give him a C-. I think that's fair. Moving on to Jack Harvey. Unfortunately, Jack Harvey's an interesting one because, you know, Rahal Letterman Lanigan was not great this year. We all know that. But Jack Harvey's teammates were obviously well above Jack Harvey. They were obviously well ahead of Jack all season. And Jack just seemed to not be there at all at any of the races. He finished 10th at Nashville, and I doubt anybody remembers that. I think I remember in Iowa he was running inside the top 10 for a little bit and did not finish inside the top 10. It was there was nothing to talk about really for the season, and the expectations weren't too high, but I think a lot of people expected a lot better than 22nd in the standings. And yeah, I'm really interested in if that changes next season or if it stays the same. So Jack Harvey gets a D. The only positive was that he had 0 DNFs outside of Texas, where he couldn't start the race because of a wreck in practice that forced him out. But I mean, yeah, I hope that things start moving upward for Jack Harvey. We've seen what he can do in the past in the Shank car, and I mean, it's just when his teammates are, inside the top 15 in the standings, and Jack's 22nd, and then there was not a single race this year that you can look at and say, okay, Jack Harvey, he's really getting up, he's really getting there, he's getting there. No, there's none of that. It was just quiet all year. So moving on, 21st place, Jimmie Johnson. Good job, Jimmy. Honestly, C+. Right off the bat, I'll give you the grade. I think he had a best finish of 5th at Iowa, 6th at Texas. His real highlights were on the ovals, of course. There's no doubt that he has to, still improve on the road courses. Completing 96% of the laps. I just feel like there was a lot less yellows for mistakes from Jimmie Johnson this season. That's really after last year, when I think that's all we could ask from Jimmy is just, keep doing laps and keep, gaining experience. And I mean, there was a few DNFs like Portland, obviously, where he got put in the wall by VeeKay, where it was just not his fault. So I mean, C+, just based on the Iowa performance and just based on also the fact that he finished 21st in the standings. We went over Jack Harvey, a veteran, Jack Harvey, Devlin DeFrancesco, and Kirkwood, and Kellett. He's 21st in standings, not last, had a few good runs this year, and I think he can improve even better next season on tracks, on ovals. So moving on to Callum Ilott, one of the standout rookies this season, and I think a lot of people forget that he actually had to miss a race at Detroit because of his crash in the 500. So that definitely didn't help him in the standings. But he had a best finish of 8th. I think that was at the GP. But I think he really was most successful this season in qualifying. He had an average start of 15th, which in a Juncos car, one-car team, really probably not the most funded car in the field, probably not the best equipment either. So, starting second at Laguna in the last race of the season, there were a few amazing performances by Callum this season, and I hope next season, adding a second car to Juncos Hollander Racing, that he will be able to, if he can get a veteran teammate, someone who can, who can share data with and work with on, getting more up to speed on the ovals and such. I think he was one of the standout rookies this year. Unfortunately, had to miss a race. He gets a B- in my book. I think he surprised a lot of people because the expectations for being a one-car team at Juncos, and he had a few starts at the end of last season, but in your first season, one-car team, smaller team, I think he really did as much as you can ask, really. So in 19th in the standings, we have Takuma Sato. Now, he had a best finish of 5th at Gateway. Could have won that race. 10 lead lap finishes. So there's 7 where he didn't, finish on the lead lap. And an average finish of 16th. But other than that, it was a really quiet year for Takuma. And there's some rumors that this might have been his last season in IndyCar, which I hope is not the case. And there, in the beginning of the season, there were a lot of races where Takuma just didn't qualify well, and then you would look at the results at the end of the race, and he'd be inside the top 10. So, I mean, it wasn't a terrible year, but there's just not a lot to say, and especially being 19th in the standings for a veteran like Takuma, who's been in the sport for a long time, is definitely disappointing. So he gets a C. Not great, not bad. So finishing 18th on the year is Helio Castroneves, and Helio, outside of his 27th to 7th run at the 500, not much to say, really. He finished 8th at Mid-Ohio and 7th at Long Beach, so 2 road course top 10s on top of the top 10 of the 500. They really weren't as good as I expected them to be on tracks like Iowa or even Gateway. They were just nowhere to be found, and I really just... Shank's season was weird to me. Being basically an Andretti car, with the Andretti Alliance, through Shank. I expected them to be a little bit more competitive, but I think that they're obviously Helio's first full-time season with this car. Not to mention the air screen, all the things that have changed since he was full-time last. Maybe it was just a get up to speed year, and then next year we'll see kind of the Helio of the past return, or maybe we'll see him in the top 10 a lot more, and I hope so for Helio. But yeah, Helio gets a C, just like Takuma, kind of in the same spot where it was just pretty quiet season, but there was nothing, just bad, outright bad that just stood out from Helio this season. 17th in the standings was Conor Daly. He had a best finish of 5th at the GP. I think he was 6th at the 500. Once again, he was a contender for the 500. I believe Conor that I do think this is probably some of the best, smartest driving he's probably had in IndyCar. But you look at the engineering front at Ed Carpenter Racing, and it's not like there's not talented people over there. I don't think they have what the other teams have when it comes to experience on those cars, and it really shows, like in qualifying. Pretty much everywhere outside of the 500, they were just nowhere to be found. It was really inconsistent year, but I don't believe it's a driver issue. So Conor gets a B-, especially for still being a 500 contender this year. Hopefully next year, they are close to winning the 500. They are close to being there, to where they can go out there and outright just lead laps and be at the front. So 16th in the standings, David Malukas. So I think there were no expectations for Malukas this season, honestly. He was great in lights, obviously, but I don't think the majority of people that know him now, after Gateway and a couple of his great qualifying performances, I don't think the people that know him now really knew enough about him in the beginning of the season to really have expectations for him. And to finish 16th in the standings with a podium, a best finish of 2nd, could have won a race had it been 5 laps longer. I think he really surprised some people. Only 3 DNFs in your rookie year. It's not bad. 16th in the standings. You have something to work for next year. You're super close to being top 15 this season. So next season, that should be goal number 1, 15th in the driver standings. He was very impressive on the ovals. That was my biggest surprise from Malukas this season, was how good he was at ovals, especially during Indy 500 month. I did not expect that. I would not have bet on that at the beginning of the month. And he was just super strong, super smart. Not only obviously he was in a fast car with a teammate like Takuma Sato to help him out. That helps. But he was super smart all month long, I thought. So, just kudos to Malukas this season. He gets an A-. 15th in the standings, Simon Pagenaud. So, 15th in the standings, not bad, but it's not what we are used to seeing Simon Pagenaud. It's not a position that we're used to seeing Pagenaud in. Best finish is 2nd this season at the GP. After Toronto, this was a fun fact when I was looking at the stats, he only had 2 finishes inside the top 20 after Toronto. Because Pagenaud's season, he was as high as 8th in the points around Indy, which was, great. First season in the Shank car, being top 10 in the standings, that was phenomenal. That was probably past expectations. You were probably exceeding your expectations for Pagenaud first year in that car. And something around the summertime in the middle of the season, they just fell off. They fell down, and I don't know what happened. Hopefully they can, be better next season. But yeah, there was some good, podium. I think there was some top 10, some good runs out of Pagenaud. There was some decent, and then downright ugly at the end of the season. Towards the end, it got bad. So Pagenaud, first year, I'll give him a break for first year with Shank. It's a B. Next season, if it continues same, might drop down to like a C, but B. I'm comfortable with giving him a B this year. I think he did all right, given first season with this team. 14th in the standings, Christian Lundgaard. Now, Lundgaard, however I say it, he surprised a lot of people. He came out of nowhere. At the beginning of the season, even in the beginning, I even started to ask myself, where is Lundgaard? Because after seeing his debut, at the IMS road course last fall, where he qualified really well, ran really well. I think me and a lot of people were expecting this season, this is a guy that's going to compete for top 10s, top 5s right off the bat. This is going to be one of those rookies that is going to join the series, and he's just going to be there. He's going to be a force to be reckoned with. He might even win a race. But he was kind of outside the top 15, kind of struggling a little bit. He wasn't finishing bad because he only had 2 finishes all season outside of the top 20. So, I mean, he wasn't doing terrible, but he was just not where I think a lot of us expected him to be. Now you go towards the middle of the summer, when Rahal and Lanigan seemed to have, done some testing and figured something out. Career best finish of 2nd at the IMS road course. And then he just goes on to win Rookie of the Year and, 14th in the standings, which isn't bad. If I give Malukas an A-, Christian Lundgaard gets an A-. I think those two, Lundgaard won the Rookie of the Year, but those two, I think, were 2 standouts this year that I think are looking pretty good going into their 2nd year. And, even Ilott, Lundgaard, Malukas, Ilott, I think those are guys that you could look at to be fighting for, maybe a couple podiums next year, maybe a win out of Lundgaard, maybe, I don't know. But I think Rahal, towards the middle of the season, when they figured something out and they finally started running towards the front, I think that kind of solidified Rahal's decision to bring him in to the team. Finishing 13th in the standings was Romain Grosjean, and I think that will come as a disappointment to some people because last season with the Dale Coyne team, he really had a lot of great drives. He was certainly the story throughout the 2021 season for how well he drove in his first year. And moving to Andretti, I think a lot of people including me, expected a lot better pace. He did have that solid drive at Long Beach, but outside of the year, the only time you heard about Romain Grosjean was when he was involved in some type of contact or some type of beef. Honestly, that's really all it comes down to with Romain Grosjean was, he was either in the top 5, had a great weekend, or he was just involved in controversy, making contact with people. He made a lot of contact this year, I will say that. I witnessed it firsthand at a lot of the races I went to, and even the ones that weren't on TV, it felt like a lot of times that he could not make a pass without making contact. He gets a C this year. He wasn't great. Not a great year. I think it was honestly a little bit disappointing. It did not surpass expectations. It was pretty far below expectations, I have to say. But we've seen that he can drive. He finished 2nd in a race this year. I just like to see Grosjean improve. He gets a C. So 12th position this year was Rinus VeeKay, and same thing like I said with Conor. I don't think it's a driver issue with the Ed Carpenter team. Outside the 500, like I said, they were nowhere. Rinus ended up, having a best finish of 3rd. And Rinus, as a driver, is one of those talents in the series right now that I think Penske eventually will probably scoop up, just like Newgarden. I think he's that good. And like I said, if Ed Carpenter can just, if they bring in some more people, some more experienced engineers, it's not lack of talent, I would say. I would really need to look into this and learn a bit more, but I think it's experience, and I think they just need to get some guys, some fresh blood in there and kind of mix some things up and make some changes, because this has been a thing for a couple of years now. It's not new, and I really would like to see Rinus VeeKay be competing for top 5s and podiums and, maybe even race for a championship, and I think he can do that with Ed Carpenter Racing. I think there's going to have to be a mix-up or something to change things up to see if they can improve. So VeeKay, in my book, gets a B. 11th in standings was Graham Rahal. He had a best finish of 4th at Toronto, which it wasn't an easy 4th. You could see it. He was fighting for his life to stay in 4th all day. That was the one race where they had a good qualifying. 9 top 10s this year. That's something I think that will probably surprise some people to hear if you weren't paying attention to Graham finishing in the top 10. He was 9th in points all the way until the Indy GP with, if you look at their qualifying efforts, probably shouldn't have been 9th in the standings. It wasn't bad. It was bad qualifying. It's really funny this is not a new thing either. It's really funny to me seeing Graham year after year in the Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan team, they just simply always struggle in qualifying. And the race cars, they tend to always drive towards the front. It's not uncommon, like with 9 top 10s, to see Graham Rahal go from starting 17th to 18th and finishing 9th or 8th. It's not an uncommon thing. When they used to have, I don't think they still have these the standings, but they used to have the Tag Heuer passing championship where they would add up every car passed throughout the season, and Graham won that a couple of years, or he's at least top 3, because they can't qualify and they can race really well. And I heard Rahal Letterman's bringing in some engineer talent from Red Bull, so some fresh blood, some things to hopefully improve for next year. If they can get qualifying down, get a little bit better race car, I think next season Graham, Lundgaard, and even Harvey, hopefully Harvey, can start competing week in and week out for top 10s and top 5s, and maybe Graham can get back in victory lane. So I'll give Graham a B, because I don't think a lot of people had Graham nowhere on the radar, but yeah, he was still finishing top 10 most weeks. So 10th in the standings, unfortunately, he's Colton Herta, because he was in a big battle at the end where he could have finished as high as 8th, ends up finishing 10th, and that will give him 32 super license points instead of 35. So even if he competed in every FP1 through the end of the season, he would not have enough for a super license still. So that's the unfortunate part of Colton Herta in 10th. But he did win a race at the GP. Just overall a year for Colton, it was just this mediocre results. It was off and on, whether he'd be in the top 5, maybe podium, maybe have a car to win. I don't know what happened between 2021 and this season, whether the Andretti cars just, are lacking something this season versus last, or what's happening, because it's just, seeing his, going into this season and seeing the end of last year, you would have thought, man, Colton is really going to be a dangerous threat for this championship. And I just, where was it? I don't know. I still think he's capable, but what scares me going into next season, if he's staying in IndyCar, is, losing Rossi to Air McLaren SP. Colton's now the only IndyCar winner on that team. And you have Kirkwood in his second year, DeFrancesco in his second year, Grosjean in his third year, all haven't won yet, and Colton is basically the new team leader. You could argue he was the team leader, but with Rossi there, you kind of had a two-headed monster there. But now, I don't know. I'm nervous. I'm nervous about it. I'm not going to lie. So that's going to be interesting to see. But Colton this season gets a B-. I wish it was more. And I think it's not lack of talent. It's not messing up, on the driving side. I just think there was something missing all year. There was something missing. Obviously, there was the mechanicals, like at the GP, the second GP, where he had a gearbox issue. He probably could have won that. But yeah, I thought that was interesting. I thought it was an interesting year for Colton. And certainly, I think a lot of people, including me, expected more. So he gets a B-. 9th in the standings, Alexander Rossi. Now, this didn't quite feel like the Alexander Rossi of old, but he definitely felt like he had a little bit of a comeback season this year. Won the second Grand Prix. He got to as high as 7th in the standings, ended out the season 9th. Definitely, not old Rossi, not dominating at Road America by 30 seconds Rossi, but definitely a Rossi that I'm really looking forward to seeing at Air McLaren SP next year, because, when you look at it, we talk about the big 3 in IndyCar with Ganassi, Penske, and Andretti. Well, I think McLaren has kind of taken Andretti's place in the big 3. Honestly, Rossi gets a B+ this season, but like I said, I think next season's really when you got to start looking at Rossi with a team like McLaren, who is has taken Andretti's place in the big 3. I think he's stepping up to a better team. So I'm excited to see that. So finishing the season 8th place in the standings was Felix Rosenqvist, or Fief, as David Land likes to call him. Honestly, this was the Felix Rosenqvist I think we've been expecting to see his entire career this season. Best finish of 3rd at Toronto, and I really think that Felix just took a big step up this season. It felt like towards the end of the year, Just most of the season, he was inside the top 10, just fighting, scratching, and clawing all year long. I think him and Billy Vincent have really clicked. He led laps at the 500. Had the Ganassi cars have not been so freaking strong, Felix would have won that race. Like, that was the funny thing at the end of this year's 500, where Felix is just gone, and I'm just like, no way, without a tow, Ericsson is just going to catch him and do what he did, and he did it. So, I mean, Felix, was in a position to legitimately win the 500 this year, and just finished 8th in the standings, inside the top 10, finished ahead of a lot of drivers. He gets an A. Great season. I hope he returns next year. We have until September 30th until the option runs out for McLaren, and he can go sign wherever else he wants. So we'll see how that goes. But I hope he comes back. I think, Pato and him have a great relationship. Billy Vincent and Felix have a great relationship. I think it's just a great place for him, and I would hate to see Felix be taken out of that, honestly. 7th in the standings was Pato O'Ward. 2 wins this season. First short oval win of his career. An average finish of 10th all season. Only 3 DNFs, 2 were engine related. And really, that's ultimately, I think, what took him out of the championship fight was the mechanical DNFs. I don't think it was really his fault. Normally, like with Colton Herta, you'd put Pato in that same boat where you'd look at him and be like, okay, this guy is insanely good, but when is he going to be championship caliber level? Like, last season, he was already in championship contention. This season, he probably should have been without some mechanical DNFs. So, I mean, you can't really fault Pato for that. You can't fault Pato for losing last year's championship for the way he did in Long Beach. I mean, Pato's at the point now where he has a great relationship with his team. He has, he's in a good place where if he just finds some luck and maybe wins another race or two, he'll be able to be an IndyCar champion. And I think that's happening soon. So Pato gets an A just like Felix. And isn't it nice to see the 2 McLaren cars kind of on the same level, 7th and 8th in the championship? I'll give them the same grade. I think they're both right there they're right on the cusp of just getting inside the top 5 in points and being champions. So 6th in the standings is our Indianapolis 500 winner, Marcus Ericsson. And Ericsson's an interesting one to me because he won the 500. He had 3 podiums this season. And by the way, he tied his career best points finish in 6th. An average finish of 8th and 12 top 10s. I mean, the guy is just a top 10 machine, and he's always been like that. He was like that last season. And the 500 win, honestly, is what put him in the championship position that he was in my opinion, or really what it was, because Ericsson to me is a guy, he's gonna finish top 10. He's gonna, like, no doubt about it. He's that good of a driver, and he's that consistent, and he keeps himself out of trouble to where he's gonna finish in the top 10. It's pretty easy. It's a pretty safe bet. But my question of Ericsson is, when is he gonna step it up and become that guy that is, on the podium every week, on the podium, fighting for wins? I think he has a future in the series as a champion. I think he has the talent, and he already has consistency down, but he just needs to. We need to see that Marcus Ericsson that goes out and dominates a race. We have not seen that of Marcus Ericsson. You think of his wins: Detroit, chasing down Will Power, got lucky Will Power's car didn't start. Nashville, ended up front on strategy, and to be fair, he led the race to the end. And then the 500, Dixon and Palou were the class of the field, and it all just falls Ericsson's way. He was not, leading every lap, and he doesn't have to, but just for me, in the future, to solidify that guy is going to be a champion, a real championship threat, is he needs to go out there, win poles, 0 poles this season, and he needs to go out there and dominate races. That's my opinion of what I'd like to see from Marcus Ericsson, and that's always going to be my biggest question for Ericsson moving forward. And it was this season. I really thought, with how consistent he was and how inconsistent everybody else was, that Ericsson was going to be the shoe-in for the championship after Indy. But as we saw with Will Power, Power was just a little bit more consistent. P5, Alex Palou, for what he would call a disappointing season, P5 in the standings, and the way he absolutely dominated Laguna Seca, I would say the opposite. Just because he didn't win the championship like last season, I think it was a great season. The fact that you would look at this as kind of a season for Alex Palou is crazy. It is mind-blowing. 13 top 10s, tied for 4th in the points at the end of the day with the win. So 5th in the points, but tied for 4th. The only thing he was lacking is wins. 6 podiums. That's insane. Only 1 DNF all year, and yeah, he could have won the Indy 500 if it weren't for like the dumbest bad luck I've ever seen. Probably not ever seen, but just terrible luck. Palou, great season. Gets an A. That's all that needs to be said. 4th in the championship, Scott McLaughlin. Now, oh my gosh. A+, right off the bat. A+. If you were to tell me last season, after the season he had last year, that he would just come out and win 3 races, 3 poles, 7 podiums, finish first and second the first 2 races of the season. He had an average finish of 13th in 2021, up to 9th, average finish of 9th this season, average start of 15th last season to 7th this season. Oh my gosh. 15th in the standings last season, 4th this year. A+. 1 DNF all season. A+. What an improvement. This is exactly what Scott McLaughlin needed to do. He did exactly what he needed to do. He said last year, and honestly, you could see it, his biggest downfall was qualifying. It was getting, the tires up to temp and getting everything you could in 1 lap. And he was not good in qualifying. But you could see when he did advance to the second round of qualifying and qualified inside the top 12, he had good finishes last year in 2021. So it wasn't surprising when he started qualifying well that he started finishing well. What was kind of surprising to me was like St. Pete right off the bat, race 1, pole win. That was a little bit surprising to me, but I was happy to see it. This is exactly what he needed to do. Scott McLaughlin is here, guys, and I honestly, the 1 DNF was obviously the 500. I think if he finishes the top 10, top 5, and gets those good double points and doesn't have a bad day there, we might be talking about a different champion, honestly. I mean, that's, like a 40-point swing? I don't know. He did exactly what he had to do this season. A+, stellar stuff. 3rd in the standings was Scott Dixon. 2 wins this season, not a single DNF, 4 podiums, average finish to 7th. Your basic Scott Dixon season. Honestly, he gets an A because, an A+ Scott Dixon season would be champion and like more top 5s, probably like 3 more wins because it's Scott Dixon, right? So the expectations are higher, but it was still a great season. He was still doing Scott Dixon things, set of records at Indy. Didn't come away with the 500. Now the 500 would have put him to an A+, but again, it was just a regular Scott Dixon season. Therefore, has to be an A. Can't be anything more. The expectations are too high for this season to be an A+. 2nd in the standings was Josef Newgarden, and this was probably my favorite season of watching Josef Newgarden. Had 5 wins, most in the series. That was incredible. There was that Iowa race 2 crash where he won the first day. Something broke in the second race, and after the race ended up fainting in the bus lot and hitting his head, going to the hospital. There was, had a stand-in driver ready to go at Nashville if he couldn't race. And it was the way this season that Newgarden he would get beaten down and he would just handle adversity and come back even stronger. There was 3 or 4 points in the season where he'd have a few races outside the top 10 and he'd kind of struggle, and then he'd come back and he'd win, dominating wins, by the way, and then he was back. I remember, after Iowa, he won the first day while he was leading in the second race. He had come from like 4th to 1st on that weekend in the standings, and honestly had a pretty sizable lead when he was leading in Iowa race 2, just to crash and drop back to 4th with a big deficit. And then he came back to finish 2nd in the standings. Now, he is easily your champion with a few miscues this season, kind of cleaned up, but he still gets an A+. The amount of times that Josef just was beaten down, the way he handled adversity and came back, that I really enjoyed seeing that from Josef. It was really exciting to watch. I mean, the way he came through the field at Laguna, tried everything he could with the strategy. I mean, changed the reds, added a pit stop to his race at the end of Laguna for it to mean absolutely nothing, but just for the fact that, you know, they had to try something different to try and catch Palou, even though it didn't work. Insane. Awesome to watch. They did everything they could. The way that Josef handled adversity was amazing. He gets an A+. And finally, your champion, Will Power. 1 win with 9 podiums. That is over 50% of the races on the podium. That was insane. 0 DNFs. Broke Mario Andretti's pole record. Had an average finish of 6th. 12 top 5s. And he had a worst finish of 19th. And then like 15th twice. That's it. So 19th, 15th, 15th. That's 3 races out of the season. The rest of it, money. Beautiful consistency. You know, just probably the best season we've probably seen out of Will Power. Really just only 1 win, but just so consistent. So consistent. Just so good. And, you know, it's awesome to see because there were a few years after he'd won his championship in 14 where, you know, the question kind of was, would we ever see the Will Power in championship contention like we saw in the early 2010s? I mean, if you go back, obviously everybody remembers, you know, the championship battles in 2010, 11, 12, where Power was right there, especially 2012. And then he finally won it in 14. He's been in contention a couple times, but there was not ever another situation like this year where he was leading and he was, you know, kind of sitting in a good spot to get it done if he just executed, and he executed. It was really great to see. I was really happy to see it because honestly, if you look at the stats, Power's right there in number of wins with Scott Dixon with way less starts. The only thing he's missing really on that resume compared to Dixon is the number of championships. And if you look at how many he lost in the early 2010s, you know, we could be talking about Will Power, 5, 6-time champion, which there's still a possibility for that. But when you look at the numbers, you know, does he have 5 champion? Does he go 5 straight championships from now on, and, you know, gets to 7 to get to AJ? Probably not. I would be here for it. I'd be happy to see it. That'd be fun. But if you just realistically, probably not. But he could get another 500 though. He could if Penske can get their stuff together at the 500 again. We'll see though. That's everything we have to look forward to next season. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you go down and hit the subscribe button. Really helps me out. Make sure you check out all my other videos and stay tuned for more IndyCar content next season, and for maybe some Motul Petit Le Mans content, maybe some sprint car racing content by the end of the year. We will just have to see. So thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time. Eating an Arby's buffalo chicken sandwich. I'm gonna put a review at the very end of the credits. I already took a bite, but I could use pickles. Overall sandwich gets like a solid 5.